Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I am here with.
Brian Holland, also known as BW Holland from Chaosium.
Yes, and today we're going to talk about Alone Against the Static. Is this your first published work with Chaosium?
This is my first published work with Chaosium. I do have some other pieces. There's actually a manuscript I wrote for a Call of Cthulhu book a couple of years ago, which is somewhere in the pipeline. I'm not sure where. But this will be the first thing with my name on it coming out, which is I'm personally very excited about for obvious reasons, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. So how would you describe this project exactly?
People are familiar with the other Alone series that we've sort of done for Call of Cthulhu. This is solo Call of Cthulhu. So in the style of like the old choose your own adventure fighting fantasy type books, it's very similar to that, except that you actually play the role-playing game. So it's not just flip to this page to do X or Y. There are still mechanics and you still have a character sheet. So you'll still make your D100 roll to see if you pass your athletics check, all that kind of stuff. And we've got a few of them. So there's Alone Against the Flames, which is in the starter set, which actually teaches you the basics of the game and how to make a character as you play it. So that's probably the one that the most people are familiar with because we're sold, everyone has a copy of the starter set at this stage. And if you don't, go get one. And then there's Alone Against the Frost and Alone Against the Dark and Alone Against the Tide, and this is Alone Against the Static. And I suppose what really makes Alone Against the Static different is two things. One is thematic and one is mechanical. Thematic reason is this is actually set in the 1990s. So when I originally pitched it, I pitched it as I said this is modern era Cthulhu, and I said it in the early 90s because I like that period. And then I was told by the editors, I'm really sorry to inform you of this, Brian, but the 90s was 30 years ago, and that is no longer modern Cthulhu. And I'm like, oh, right, oh gosh. I felt myself waste away. So it is a 90s adventure. Either way, it's still very different to the 1920s as a setting. And the mechanical difference is that I actually created what I call the log sheet, which in video game parlance is a mechanic that gates certain content. So, for instance, if I'm not sure if anyone's ever played a video game who might be watching this, but if you play a video game, for instance, and you might be trying to solve a puzzle or something, you walk into a room and it's like, oh, I don't know how to open this locker, and then you realize you've got to go and discover the key or the secret combination to the locker, and once you have that, you come back with it, whatever. So the log sheet in Alone Against the Static is essentially it tracks not just items you find, but also things your character says and does and interacts with. So a thing that happens early on is you might use the bathroom in the small secluded cabin that you and your partner are staying in the weekend, because you have a choice when you first show up. You're like, oh, it's been a long drive. Do you want to use the bathroom or do you want to go and help out in the kitchen? And if you go to the bathroom, you will notice that the bathroom lock doesn't actually lock all the way unless you jiggle it a little bit. And then when you discover that, the game prompts you to go to the log sheet and tick the achievement that says occupied. Later in the story, if you have that occupied achievement ticked, that will matter, which means that because your character knows that there's a problem with the bathroom lock, that will either help or hinder you later on. So and it sort of also works like a little achievement sheet because they're all spoiler free. They're just like little statements like that, where if you just read them without context, you wouldn't know what any of it means. So you can look at it fine, but you can go through and you tick them, and they basically enhance your experience, really, because it makes it a bit more interactive, in my opinion, than just a standard choose your own adventure. And the other thing that I think is cool is you can play it multiple times and try and find all the different things that you can get. I don't think it might not actually be possible to get all of them in a single playthrough, but the first time you play it, you might look down and you'll be like, oh, I missed like 10 of these. So I wonder what I could do differently. And some of them are particularly difficult to find. That's the big mechanical difference, I suppose.
So if I may ask, this is your first published work. Why this story? I mean, you could have written about werewolves in New York City. You could have done aliens in Canada. Why this story?
Horror as a genre is very divisive for a bunch of reasons. Because I think there'll be a bunch of reasons within this, but the core reason as to why horror is divisive is because the same thing doesn't scare everybody. Like like Manny, you might tell me that, oh, I watched The Exorcist the other night. That scares the hell out of me. The idea of demons and possession, like, because I don't know what to do in that situation. And I could say, well, I don't believe in demons, so that's not scary at all. But a guy coming up with an axe, that's really scary. And you might be like, but it's just a guy with an axe. I'll trip him over, whatever. Not saying that you think either of those things, but you see what I'm saying. Like, yeah, for example. So what I wanted to do with Alone Against the Static was sort of show like that Call of Cthulhu as a game can be used for different types of horror. The story of Alone Against the Static is what I would call more of a slow boil horror, sort of in maybe closer to the sort of pacing of a film like Hereditary, as opposed to the pacing of a film like Scream. So there is certainly Alone Against adventures that you can play where by the third choice you've encountered like some sort of monster and you've got to deal with it. And that's a different type of horror to this one. And there'll be some people that will play Alone Against the Static and be like, wow, you're really sort of spending a lot of time talking with your husband or your wife in this cabin. When's the scary stuff happening? And there'll be other people that are playing it being like, wow, the idea of being alone in a cabin with no way to contact the outside world with just this one other person is kind of really scary for me. And I'm very anxious to see what's going to happen. And that's the kind of horror that I'm trying to hype up. The reason I didn't want to write about werewolves in New York City, for instance, is I've spent some time in New York City, but and I know a thing or two about werewolf lore. But I grew up in a country house that was locked in by state forest for about 1.5 miles in every direction. And I used to joke that I grew up in like Blair Forest from the Blair Witch Project. Where you're just really, really secluded, and there's a lot of people who maybe you've never spent time in a place like that. Even if you're from a country town, if you go further out into the country, like a really secluded area, there's things that happen that you might not be aware of, like what nighttime darkness can actually be like. So like waking up in the middle of the night and it being so dark you can't even see your hand in front of your face. And I think there's a different level of horror, and there's different things you can do. A lot of things I like with like folk horror, for instance, that exist out in those wild places of the world, which I think are really fun to look at through a modern lens of Call of Cthulhu.
As a New Yorker, when it comes to being like in the middle of the night in the city, I kind of have a sense of where to go to be safe. Stay with the light, stay with the noise.
Exactly.
Never venture alone. But the woods, I now live in Massachusetts, and the woods are scary as crap. If there's pockets of darkness, and I don't know what's out there and everything, and I find that type of horror quite fascinating. Something about this naturalness. What is it about nature that can be so eerie?
I'm not sure. Like I remember when I was a kid growing up in that house that was in the middle of the woods, and I would get, I'd watch a scary movie and I'd get really scared. The things that I would tell myself to comfort myself is like, hey, one day you'll live in an apartment in the city, and you won't have to worry about what's outside because there are lights all the time. And cool, like you can still get scared and horrific things can still happen in the city, obviously. But there is some sort of comfort in that like, especially if you're in an apartment building, like, oh, there's something scary happening, but I know there's also other people just on the other side of this wall or below my feet or above me or whatever, right? But the idea about being secluded and it being so dark, and I think there's like a theme or a concept that I try to explore without spoiling anything, by the way, in Alone Against the Static is, what is it? Basically, your exact question is, what is it that could exist in those wild, secluded places where humankind don't even really inhabit? Like, what is there maybe to discover in those forgotten places of the world? And I think it maybe comes back to that core sort of lizard brain human instinct to fear the darkness, because you fear what you don't see and what you don't know. And when you see like you're talking about looking into the woods in Massachusetts and being like, well, I don't really know what's out there and it's really dark and I don't know where the safe places are. And I think there's like a core fear in that, which I think is a really fun thing to explore.
I'm intrigued that this is a solo RPG. If you asked me a few years ago how I would have felt about solo RPGs, I would have been very confused about like, why would you want to play a solo RPG? Until I played one, and I realized like, oh, this is just like those old choose your adventure books. There were certain types I remember that you had to use dice, so seeing it sort of coming back is really interesting, and I'm enjoying them. They're also great tools to teach people how to play. I'm actually teaching someone how to play Call of Cthulhu by using the what you mentioned before, what was in the starter
You're
set.
Against the Flames, yeah.
Yes.
That
So,
one, yeah.
if I may ask, when you thought of this story in your head, did you think of this as a solo RPG in the beginning? Did it transfer that way later?
Yeah, so I've written a number of traditional scenarios for TTRPGs in the past. I've written a whole Vampire the Masquerade campaign for the folks at Paradox, and I've written a bunch of still somewhat in the pipeline Call of Cthulhu adventures as well. And I think the reason I wanted to make this a solo adventure is I think I don't want to use the word railroady, but if I were to write the same story as a traditional adventure, people might create their own characters and bring their characters to the story, and it's there are far more. It's be much more difficult to sort of tell the story that I wanted to tell, which was ultimately about I want to tell a story about a relationship between two people and how this sort of long weekend will affect that relationship and how that horror manifests in that relationship. So you couldn't really do this exact story in a situation with a group of 5 people, particular or even 3 people or 4 people. That's the other thing, is that I really wanted to tell a story about people being, alone and secluded. You might be able to do this as a one-on-one adventure or something like that, but I think the main thing just came down to the specific type of story I wanted to tell. I think lended itself more to the solo situation, and that sort of trying to get the verisimilitude between the player and the character. Because I advise, if anyone goes to play this, you'll get it in PDF. If you can get it in PDF, you can get the hardcover as well. But when you do it, I really recommend what you do is play it with, at nighttime on your couch when you're alone, and put on like a pair of headphones that play like nighttime nature sound, like on a loop, and just let yourself just be consumed by it as much as possible, I suppose, to try and feel what it's like there. I'm trying to be very transportative, which is another thing that's more difficult to do when you've got a group of people, and you might be, someone's like eating some chips and someone else might want to get up, someone might be on their phone, someone's using a laptop, and that's all fine. That's how I play role-playing games all the time. But again, for this particular story that I really felt like telling, I thought that the solo scenario area was the best place to do it. And then there were also some other sort of marketing reasons why I'm like, hey, we've never actually done a modern solo. I wonder how that will go in comparison to the other solos. I wonder if this will indicate that maybe, oh, turns out people want more modern Cthulhu stuff from us, so maybe we should do more of that. Yeah, that kind of thing. So it's sort of, like a test and just sort of see if it works. And we're going to try out the log sheet mechanic, which is cool. The other thing I didn't mention was you actually have a choice in Alone Against the Static to play Alex or Charlie, so either one of the 2 partners. And the main difference is that they each have different character sheets, which means they have different strengths and weaknesses, I suppose. So
I'm glad you mentioned about the character sheets. Something I sort of kind of know the answer to this question, but I figured we should bring it up just in case anyone hearing this for the first time is just maybe concerned, like, oh wow, do I have to know the rules for Call of Cthulhu, or do I need to have a lot of knowledge about the lore? Does anyone need to know anything or bring anything to play this game?
sure. So it is a scenario like Alone Against the Flames, which is the one that comes in the starter set, that you can just play pretty much by itself, because that's the job, is to teach you how to play the game as well as playing through the story. Alone Against the Static does assume a level of knowledge of the rules, but I'd like to use this instance to remind everyone that the core rules for Call of Cthulhu are very, very simple, and this is actually designed to be used with just the sort of slimline 12, I don't think it's even 12 pages, but the little booklet that comes in the starter set is all the rules you need. You basically only need to know how to make a roll, which is you're going to roll a D100 and get equal to or lower than the target number of that skill. And the game will actually prompt you, like, if you got this result, go here. If you got that result, go there. Alone Against the Static will actually, some instances, allows you to push a roll as well, which is a Call of Cthulhu mechanic. Whereas if you fail a roll, you can attempt that roll again, but something bad will happen. And this is another thing that I wanted to put into a solo experience, is in like, oh, cool, yes, you failed to make your search roll to try and find the flashlight. Would you like to push it and attempt the roll again? But if you fail a second time, you're actually going to waste a lot of in-game time, and it might be even later by the time you leave the cabin to go on your walk, like that kind of thing. So basically all you need is the quick start rules for Call of Cthulhu, which you can download for free off the Chaosium website, or if you have the starter set. There's also a couple of pages at the start of Alone Against the Static that basically tell you how this particular version of the game handles things like what happens if you die or lose sanity. So there's actually a lot of that built into the product as well.
So let's talk about the art direction. Call of Cthulhu books always have amazing, amazing art, amazing layout and design. What can you tell us about the direction for this book particularly?
So to be clear, I didn't do the art direction for this book. The art direction was done by Mike Mason and James Coquier. Jamie also did a lot of the editing on the book as well. Yeah, no, they did a fantastic job. And so all that is to say that I'm very happy to be very, very happy with what the art looks like here, and I'm not praising myself by saying that. The art is all done by a gentleman named Nicholas Gray, who I believe is who lives in Ireland. And yeah, I'm very glad that the direction that Mike and Jamie went with for the art was sort of a more modern, sort of realistic style. There's some really great and some very evocative pieces. I don't think I've mentioned it yet, but Alone Against the Static is set in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And I think Nick Gray, with the art that he's done, has really captured sort of the essence, like the pine trees and the rocky ridges. The more modern style he's gone with is really evocative of the story I was going to tell. I didn't see any of the art in progress. I only saw it when it was finished, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. And the weird thing about it is, I like. There's no map of the cabin that you're staying in Alone Against the Static. I only describe it a little bit, but the weirdest thing is that the art that he did of the interior of the cabin, like right down to where things are placed, is exactly where I personally was picturing it when I was writing it. So it was kind of really eerie for me because, I didn't go down to the minute details, like, 2 feet to the left of that is where that sits, but he and I were very aligned, apparently. I've never spoken to him, but I was very happy with it personally. So.
For anyone that's playing this for the first time, maybe they're new to Call of Cthulhu, enjoying this, and then they're thinking, okay, where can I go next? Is there any source books, any direction you can give them?
Yeah, I mean, if you're new to the Call of Cthulhu, the best place to start is obviously the Call of Cthulhu starter set. Yeah, the Call of Cthulhu Keeper rulebook is what you need to really dive in. If you like the Alone Against the static sort of setting, the book actually includes in the back of it, in one of the appendices, a full description and breakdown of the new monster, which is, I'm not going to talk about in detail for obvious reasons, but the creature or creatures that appear in Alone Against the Static are actually listed in the same format as our Malleus Monstrorum Cthulhu Bestiary. So what that essentially is a brand new monster, deity, creature entry that you can take and then actually use in your full games of Call of Cthulhu. So if you like the setting and whatever, you can use the setting, use that creature, and write your own Call of Cthulhu scenario using that. And that's actually also a fun way to start as well. So you could personally play through Alone Against the Static. You get an idea for what the horror is and what the creature can do, and just sort of turn this into a similar tabletop experience as a group. I actually did this myself with the group called the Glass Cannon at Gen Con this year. They wanted me to run some modern Cthulhu for them last minute because they had a cancellation, and I just sort of took the exact setting and the monster I'd created and was like, cool, let's just do this. And that was a very different experience, mostly because they decided to make 4 characters who are all going away to this cabin for a bachelor party. So it was very funny, but the horror really ramped up as well. But if you're new to Call of Cthulhu, there's and you like the Alone style stuff, there's a bunch of them available that I've already mentioned. And I think the next best thing you can do is probably get on Discord and just find some people to play with, unless you've got friends already, unlike me. So,
so this is your first work. I'm going to assume this is not your last work. What are your next plans, if I may ask?
Sure. I mean, as far as the TTRPG world goes, I've got some. Well, I mentioned that I've written a manuscript for a full Call of Cthulhu supplement, which I can't talk about because it's in development. I wish I could. I'm very excited about it. I've also got some scenarios which are actually going to be published as part of a scenario collection. Those of you who are familiar with Call of Cthulhu will know books like this. Mansions of Madness, Doors to Darkness, Gateways to Terror. They're all books of scenario collection. So I've got one of those coming out. I'm actually also working on a short sort of 2-part RuneQuest scenario, which I'm pretty excited about. But the thing is, those of you watching who don't know, I'm actually also the marketing director at Chaosium, and that's obviously a full-time job. And I do this writing, in addition to that work. So when I have free time in the evenings or whatever, so I don't have as much time to do as much writing as I would like to, or to pitch pitch the various line editors on things that I could do that they might want in the first place too. So yeah, I've got a bunch of things on the back burner that I would really like to do. I really want to, if we can find a way to do it, I would really like to use the new basic role-playing universal game engine that we've got out to make a hyper-realistic Wild West sort of frontier game. So as in a Wild West game that's not actually Weird West. There's no aliens or monsters or anything. It is just like you're on the frontier, you're a cowboy, and you play it like, year to year Pendragon style. So as the years pass, the town changes, and you could essentially role play out Deadwood from camp to city if you wanted to. I think that'd be really cool. But yeah, there's a bunch of things I would really like to do. So we'll find out. Yeah.
Thank you, Brian, for taking the time to talk to us about this work. I'm really excited about it. And I can't wait to play this over and over and over again. And to our viewers, stay safe out there. Watch out for the woods. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much.